Montana Territory, 1882. The wind clawed at the pine trees like a restless spirit, bending their black silhouettes against a gunmetal sky. A storm was crawling over the Bitterroot Mountains, dragging its cold breath down into the valley below. The clouds churned, low and heavy, thick with the promise of rain. And worse. Wyatt Mercer pulled his duster tighter around him as he guided his horse through the narrow trail. Boone, his old buckskin gelding, snorted, ears flicking uneasily at the approaching thunder. Wyatt said nothing. He never did much these days. His eyes, the color of ash, swept over the darkened woods, sharp as a hawk's, worn as river stone. Grief had carved deep lines into his face. Grief and winter, and the silence that comes after a family dies. His wife, his little boy. Fever took them both last December, and with them, it took the last of his reasons to speak. The wind shifted, carrying with it something else. A faint creaking sound. Wood. Rope. Something swaying. Boone stopped dead. Wyatt narrowed his eyes, scanning the dense pines. There ahead, half-shrouded by the mist and trees, something dangled from a branch, rocking gently in the storm's breath. Wyatt's gut tightened. His hand drifted toward the rifle lashed to his saddle. It wasn't an animal. It was human. Wyatt nudged Boone forward, boots silent against the damp earth. Each step brought the figure into sharper focus. A young woman, no older than 18, maybe less. She hung by her wrists from a thick pine branch, her bare feet inches from the forest floor. Her arms were bound tight, with frayed rope, the skin beneath raw and bloodless. Her head slumped forward, dark hair matted to her face. The tattered remnants of a nun's habit clung to her slender frame, though the fabric was torn, muddied, and stained. But it wasn't just the noose of rope that turned Wyatt's stomach. It was the sign. A crude plank of splintered wood dangled from her neck by a thin cord. Jagged letters, burned into the grain with a hot iron, spelled out, "God won't forgive." The words dripped with spite, etched with the trembling hand of a man eager to humiliate more than to kill. Wyatt's eyes swept the woods. Silence, save for the wind through the pines. No horses, no men, just wagon tracks gouged into the muddy trail nearby, leading east. Whoever did this, they were gone. For now, the girl stirred. Barely. Her lips, cracked and blue from the cold, quivered with shallow breath. Her eyes fluttered, bruised, bloodshot, but alive. Wyatt cursed under his breath. This wasn't his problem. He didn't want it to be. Not after last winter. Not after the graveyard behind his cabin filled with 2 new crosses. But leaving her here? No decent man would. And despite everything, he wasn't ready to be an indecent man. Not yet. Wyatt pulled his hunting knife free. With careful hands, he sliced the ropes. The girl collapsed like a rag doll into his arms, her body light as bird bones beneath the ruined habit. Her skin was ice. Her wrists were torn raw. She weighed next to nothing. Wyatt pulled his coat from the saddle and wrapped it around her trembling form. His eyes lingered on the sign before tossing it aside, letting it thud into the mud. "Easy now," he muttered, voice rough from disuse. "Ain't gonna let you die out here." Her head lolled against his shoulder as he hoisted her onto Boone's back, but his eyes stayed fixed on the wagon tracks disappearing into the mist. Someone had left her here to die, and they weren't far. The ride back to his cabin was slow. The trail narrowed as it climbed toward the ridge, winding through dense pines and jagged rock. Rain came in fits, cold and stinging, slicking the path with mud. The girl's head rested against his chest, her breaths faint but steady beneath the layers of his coat. She hadn't stirred since he cut her down, but her presence it gnawed at his thoughts. Memories came unbidden. The low-fevered cries of his son, Eli, sweating and shivering beneath a wool blanket that did nothing to stop the sickness. his wife, Sarah, brushing Wyatt's hand aside as she fought to cool their boy, even as her own cheeks burned with fever. The grave he dug behind the cabin, soil frozen solid, hands blistered and bleeding. The 2 wooden crosses, no names carved, didn't need them. Their faces lived in his mind. The mountains had been his refuge ever since. No neighbors, no townsfolk offering empty words, no church sermons about God's mysterious will, just silence and work and ghosts. But now here was another ghost, a breathing one, her lips parted, voice barely more than a whisper. "Don't take me back." Wyatt stiffened, reining Boone in as they crested the ridge. "Don't take you where?" His voice cracked from lack of use. Her eyes fluttered, fever-glazed, unfocused. "The mission," she rasped. "Please don't let them find me." The words hit with the weight of a bullet. Wyatt didn't know what mission she meant, but her terror was unmistakable. Her small hand clutched at his coat, frail fingers knotting the fabric. Then, exhaustion claimed her. Her head fell forward, breath ragged and shallow. Wyatt exhaled slowly, jaw tight. He should have ridden on, should have let her be someone else's problem. But looking at her, bruised, beaten, marked for death with that cruel sign, stirred something buried deep beneath the scars. Guilt, regret, maybe the last splinter of decency clinging to his broken heart. "All right," he muttered to no one, spurring Boone forward. "But if this goes bad, I got no one to blame but myself." The trail snaked into the high country, toward his cabin hidden among the pines and stone. Wyatt kept his eyes sharp, scanning the woods as they rode. The wagon tracks were gone now, lost in the rain and undergrowth. But the unease remained. Whoever did this, they'd come looking. And when they did, he'd be ready. The cabin clung to the side of the Bitterroot Mountains like a weathered secret, tucked among towering pines, far from the nearest town, the nearest law, the nearest soul. It wasn't much. A single room, stone fireplace crackling with dry pine, a battered table, a bed tucked beneath a window frosted with mountain air. But it was sturdy. It had kept Wyatt alive through 2 harsh winters. And tonight, it would have to keep the girl alive too. Magdalena lay curled on the bed beneath wool blankets, her skin pale as snow against the faded quilt. The fire's glow painted her cheeks with faint color, but the deep shadows beneath her eyes remained. Wyatt ladled hot broth into a tin cup, steam curling into the cold cabin air. He set it on the nightstand beside her and stepped back, arms crossed. She clutched her rosary like a drowning soul, clinging to driftwood. Her knuckles were scraped, wrists bandaged now, but raw beneath the linen. She hadn't spoken since their ride back, only stared at him with eyes wide, wary, like a cornered animal waiting for the next blow. Wyatt wasn't good with words, never had been, but he wasn't blind either. As she shifted under the blankets, her torn habit slipped from her shoulder, and that's when he saw it, a brand, faint but unmistakable, seared into the pale flesh above her collarbone. It wasn't a religious mark. It wasn't anything a nun would carry. It was livestock, a rancher's mark, the old Double H brand from the valley east of the mountains. Wyatt's jaw tightened, his fingers flexed near his belt. She wasn't just some runaway nun. She'd been claimed, owned, like cattle. The pieces began to fall into place. The crude sign, the fear in her eyes, the desperation in her voice. Wyatt backed away, leaving her space. "You ain't gotta talk now," he said, voice rough as gravel. "But when you're ready, I aim to hear the truth." She said nothing, just held the rosary tighter, eyes locked on the fire. Outside, the wind scraped across the pines, and somewhere beyond, down the valley, shadows were moving. The days bled together under gray skies and low clouds. Magdalena regained her strength slowly. Broth turned to bread, Bandages came off. Her voice steadied. But the fear, that stayed. She never let the rosary out of her grasp. She startled at every branch crack, every gust of wind. At night, she curled by the fire, eyes wide open long after Wyatt had dozed off in his chair. On the fourth evening, as the fire popped and rain whispered against the roof, she finally spoke. "They'll come for me." Her voice was raw, quiet as a prayer. Wyatt, sharpening his old hunting knife by the hearth, looked up. "Who?" She hesitated, fingers tracing the rosary beads, then lifted her chin. "Preacher Hollis." The name coiled in the room like smoke. He runs the Holy Refuge Mission, east, near Coldwater Crossing. Her words shook, but her eyes stayed on Wyatt's. "It ain't a mission. It's a prison. A place for men to buy girls. They call it God's work." Wyatt's stomach soured. He'd heard of Hollis in passing. A silver-tongued preacher with a traveling mission wagon, always spouting scripture, claiming to save wayward orphans. The townsfolk whispered things. Folks disappeared, but no one dared confront him. Not when the ranchers filled his collection plate. Magdalena's voice cracked. "I was in an orphanage. After my parents died. Hollis came. Said he was saving us." Wyatt's jaw flexed. "They took me to the mission. The rich men come, they..." She broke off, staring into the flames, trembling. "If you don't obey, if you try to run..." She pulled down the fabric of her habit, exposing the brand. Her skin flinched under Wyatt's gaze, but her voice hardened. "They mark you, claim you. I tried to escape once before. They dragged me back. This time..." Her throat bobbed. "They wanted me dead." The image of her swaying from the tree flashed through Wyatt's mind. The cruel words burned into the sign. "God won't forgive." A warning, a message to the others. Wyatt leaned back, staring at the fire. His insides twisted. He'd buried his wife and boy last year. Told himself he was done with people, with helping, with fighting battles that couldn't be won. But this, leaving this girl to fend for herself, letting those devils hunt her down, it didn't sit right. "You stay here," he muttered finally, voice low. "Ain't nobody comin' to take you. Not while I draw breath." Her eyes shimmered, not with trust, but with the faintest glint of hope. Outside, the forest whispered. But it wasn't the wind alone anymore. Something or someone was out there. The knock on the cabin door was soft, deliberate, not the clumsy pounding of a drunk, nor the angry fist of a bounty hunter. Wyatt eased to the window, peering through the frosted glass. A figure stood in the rain, tall, lean, wrapped in a wolfskin cloak, dark hair braided with feathers down his back. Wyatt exhaled, shoulders taut with old memories. Elias Red Elk, half Shoshone, half trouble, all survivalist. Tracker, scout, ghost of the Bitterroots. Their history wasn't clean. Run-ins over disputed land, tense words traded over campfires, grudging respect forged in shared hardship. Wyatt cracked the door, rifle by his side. "Didn't expect you this far north." Elias's sharp eyes flicked past Wyatt, toward the cabin's glow, his expression unreadable. "Words travel in Mercer," Elias said, voice low as the mist. "Hollis's men been seen near the ridge. Searchin'. They got dogs. Guns." Wyatt's knuckles whitened on the doorframe. "Lookin' for her?" Elias nodded once. "Won't be long before they find your tracks. You always were sloppy at coverin'. Wyatt smirked, despite himself. "Why you here?" Elias shrugged. "Ain't fond of slavers hidin' behind scripture. Figure I owe 'em some discomfort." His gaze sharpened. "But you better be sure you're ready. Hollis ain't just a preacher. He's got friends. Money. Blood on his hands." Wyatt's jaw clenched. He glanced back at Magdalena, huddled by the fire, eyes wary. "I'm ready," Wyatt said. After a long pause, Elias stepped inside. The storm outside howled. The real storm was coming. The clouds hung heavy like a lead blanket over the Bitterroots. Dawn was still hours off, but the air crackled with tension, the forest holding its breath. Wyatt stood by the cabin window, peering into the mist-veiled woods. Snow flurries whispered down, dusting the pine boughs in ghostly white. His rifle leaned against the door. His revolver sat on the table, freshly oiled. They were coming. Elias Red Elk crouched by the cabin's edge, setting snares along the narrow trail. The half-Shoshone's sharp eyes scanned the treeline, every movement precise, quiet as a hunting cat. Inside, Magdalena tightened the last knot on a stack of firewood near the back wall. Wyatt had shown her how to block the door, how to load the rifle, how to stand her ground. She wasn't running. Not this time. "They're close," Elias said, slipping inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. 5 men. Dogs. Hollis rides with him. Wyatt's jaw clenched. "Clay Harlan." Elias nodded. Saw his brand on the horses. Harlan. Wealthy rancher, friend of the preacher. The kind of man who hid cruelty behind coin and reputation. Magdalena's fingers trembled, but she straightened her shoulders, her rosary dangling from her neck like a quiet defiance. Wyatt looked at her. Really looked. The bruises on her wrists were healing. Her eyes, though wary, held steel now. "Stay inside," he told her. "I'm not helpless," she shot back, voice steady despite the fear. Wyatt almost smiled. The fire was back. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about his soul. His wife, his boy, he'd buried them. But maybe he didn't have to bury what was left of himself. Tonight, he wouldn't run. Tonight, they stood their ground. The first gunshot shattered the morning stillness. It came from the ridge, echoing through the pines like thunder. Wyatt fired back from the window, his Winchester cracking, the bullet whistling through the mist. Across the clearing, Hollis's men scrambled, ducking behind trees and rocks. Elias moved like smoke, bow in hand, releasing a silent arrow that struck one man clean in the shoulder. The man yelped, collapsing into the snow. 2 at the south ridge. Elias barked. Wyatt nodded, eyes sharp, body tense. Inside, Magdalena stacked wood at the rear door, creating a barricade. Her breathing was quick, but steady. She spotted their supplies, the feed bag, the whiskey flask, and an idea sparked. Outside, the fight raged. Hollis's voice rose above the chaos, smooth, sanctimonious, dripping with false holiness. "Wyatt Mercer, you're shelterin' what belongs to God's mission. Hand her over, and I'll forget your foolishness." Wyatt spat into the snow. "You forgot what God looks like a long time ago, preacher." Clay Harlan's booming voice followed. "You got no friends out here, Mercer. No law, no town, just your ghosts." Wyatt chambered another round. "And yet here you are, afraid of a lonely rancher." A gunfight erupted. Bullets splintered wood. Snow burst into plumes as rounds struck the frozen ground. Elias flanked left, his quiet footsteps unseen. Wyatt held the front, eyes sharp, breath steady. Inside, Magdalena poured whiskey onto the stacked feed and tinder by the back door. She grabbed flint and steel, striking sparks until flame bloomed. Smoke curled out the window. Supplies would burn, but so would their escape route. If they couldn't have her, they wouldn't have their easy out either. A shout. Hollis's men noticed the smoke. Confusion rippled through their lines. Elias used the distraction, taking down another man with a swift arrow. Wyatt, bloodied from a grazing shot along his shoulder, pressed forward. His revolver barked, sending Clay Harlan sprawling into the snow, clutching his leg. Only Hollis remained. The preacher emerged from the trees, rifle aimed, eyes blazing with self-righteous fury. His black coat billowed, a silver cross glinting at his throat. "You think you can stand against God's work?" Hollis sneered. You? A broken man, drunk on grief? Protecting that harlot? Wyatt's hand tightened on his revolver. Blood dripped from his sleeve, but his stance never wavered. She ain't your possession, Wyatt growled, and I ain't your congregation. A gunshot cracked. Hollis staggered, eyes wide with shock, smoke curling from Magdalena's hands at the window, Wyatt's spare rifle gripped tight. Wyatt advanced as Hollis collapsed into the snow, clutching his side. The remaining men fled, scattered like leaves before a storm. Elias lowered his bow. Magdalena exhaled, hands trembling but victorious. The clearing fell silent, save for the wind and the distant caw of a crow. It was over. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting pale gold over the snow-dusted clearing. Hollis, bound and bloodied, sat slumped against a tree stump as Elias secured the ropes. "You'll answer to the sheriff," Wyatt muttered, spitting blood from his lip. "For the girls. For everything." Hollis only glared, righteousness stripped bare, leaving nothing but cowardice. By dusk, the sheriff from Coldwater Crossing had arrived, flanked by deputies. Witnesses, confessions, the preacher's operation, exposed. His empire of fear crumbled, but the scars, they'd linger. Magdalena stood near Boone, saddlebags packed. Her bruises had faded. Her eyes, not entirely, but they held something more now. Strength, resolve. "You sure?" Wyatt asked, adjusting the cinch on her saddle. "You could stay. Ain't much, but..." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "I need to help the others, the girls still trapped. They need to know it's possible." Wyatt nodded, swallowing the quiet ache of goodbye. "You ever need shelter?" "I'll know where to find it," she finished softly. Elias, already packed, melted into the woods with a nod. No words, just quiet respect, the ghost of the mountains returning to the shadows. Magdalena mounted her horse. Wyatt watched her silhouette disappear into the trees, sunlight chasing the clouds westward. For the first time in a long while, his cabin didn't feel like a tomb. The ghosts remained, but Hope walked beside them now, and Wyatt Mercer, broken but breathing, turned to face the rising sun.